Prioritization is the Achilles heel of strategy, right? Then why do so many businesses struggle to have clear and consistent priorities? Let me give you my best practice for high performance prioritization and how to keep your priorities from getting derailed. Let's open with an example that you'll probably find very familiar and very painful. In my own career, I worked with a variety of leaders around trying to define what strategic priorities were going to be for the company for the next 3 years. And these conversations could produce wonderful discussions and also very toxic ones. The toxic ones are what I want to talk about now, because what I found was that there were personal agendas that were getting in the way of what the business needed. And because we could not agree on what the prioritization should be, people walked away from those meetings, even with formal agreements in place, and made up their own priorities anyway. And to be fair, in my own life, I've been guilty of that. But as I matured as a leader, I found that if we could not get on the same page with prioritization, nothing was going to execute. I say that because individual groups would then peel away and create silos where they could make their own decisions in their own world to suit their own definition of success. And what happened as a result was dysfunctional, wasteful, and frankly, demotivating. So if prioritization is so important, let's talk about how to do it really well. And there's a lot of different approaches, so I think I need to take you on a journey. Let's go to the jungle. Imagine you're in the middle of a thick and wild place. There are trees and vines and foliage everywhere. And in this place, you're leading your team through the jungle. And if you don't know how to get out of it, you will never leave. So imagine your joy when you see this huge hill in front of you. It's rising up and literally out of the jungle. And you know that if you could get to the very top, you could see for miles in every direction, and you would know the best path to take to lead your team to safety. Now, use the analogy of a jungle because that's what business is like. It's full of obstacles. There are so many times where you cannot see what's coming ahead. You cannot know what the next year is going to be like. You cannot see what is coming in the next quarter. And to be honest, even the next month is full of trees and vines and wild animals. Now, let's go back to that hill. That hill represents how you prioritize. The more effective your prioritization, the better you will get to the top of the hill and navigate through the jungle with your team. At the very bottom of the hill is prioritization by urgency. We call this a fire drill. The things and people who are making the most noise get the most attention. And you know this isn't effective at all. It's straight survival mode. Everybody's running around in chaos. It won't give you any change in your perspective because all you're still going to see is jungle. It's going to be leaves and vines and trees and craziness. Now, a little higher on that hill is where we see our second approach to prioritization. And it's usually called the Eisenhower matrix, where we introduce the concept of importance to the concept of urgency. What is important? What is urgent? What is not important? What is not urgent? That model works really well in non-complex situations like planning your weekend. You know what you need to get done this weekend, maybe house chores or shopping or spending time with family. What is important versus what is urgent? And it still has a lot of limitations. If you do that in a business where things are very complex, you're still not going to get a very good view of the jungle around you. You'll still be looking at a wall of green. So now let's go higher up on that hill to that third level. And here's where the concept of prioritization really kicks in. We decide which things are more important than others. Models like ABC analysis, the Moscow method, and others become popular. You may have even developed your own using terms like gold, silver, and bronze, or eagle, birdie, and par. On our imaginary hill in the jungle, you can now see a little bit. The foliage is less dense, but the trees and the vines are still a tangled mess. You have to constantly double check if you're making progress based on what that limited view gave you. So you know you need an even better approach. And now we go to the fourth level of that hill. And here's where we start to see a bunch of models that basically start to analyze if the impact is worth the effort. We know that some things need to be done, but they're going to take a lot of work to get there. And frankly, we may not be able to do it. We may not have the budget. We may not have the people. We may not have the time, etc. So we think about what can be done and how can we do this? And is it going to be worth all the resources that will be pulled away from other initiatives to make this one happen? This leads us to examples like the cost benefit analysis, the Rice model, and the classic 80-20 or Pareto principle. The Pareto principle is fascinating because it consistently works. It says that 80% of your outcome is driven by 20% of your inputs. And that applies to 80% of your revenue comes from 20% of your customers. 80% of your talent comes from 20% of your employees. And this is where most leaders stop. They work at the math until they have a sense of what is worth the effort. But this approach still has a major flaw. In other words, it will get you to eye level with the tops of the trees, but it won't let you see down to what is on the other side of them. You'll at best get a sense of where there might be some easier path ahead, but you won't really know what's on the other side of that effort. But because you've got a great sense of confidence that it's the right direction, everybody needs to march forward now. But there's two incredibly important aspects that are missing from this prioritization model, and they need to be figured out in addition to impact and effort. The first one of these is time. And when I say that, I don't mean how long will it take to actually start. I mean, how long will it take to actually be done? This is huge. In my experience, most leaders over-rotate to when they will start and completely ignore when they'll finish. This produces a huge wave of initiatives that overlap each other and steal resources from each other. Because now you have turf wars and waste being generated because somebody's not done on time, something is taking longer than expected, somebody needs more than was originally budgeted. All of those factors fall into each other, and the jumbled mess is made worse because the next wave of initiatives is coming. We cannot simply assume that the idea will implement on schedule just because we put it on a calendar. But the second aspect we must include beyond time is disruption. Doing something that will disrupt the organization, especially when we're trying to do it quickly, well, we can almost guarantee failure. People hate being changed. And if they are under pressure to deliver an outcome that will suddenly be at risk, it's as if the jungle will come alive and start fighting you every step of the way, even if you are going in the right direction. So let's go back to our hill. If we truly want to get to the very top where we can see over the trees and figure out the best route through the jungle, we need what is called 5-6-7 prioritization. It was developed by Len Bertain and Craig Humphreys. It basically takes the cost-benefit analysis and factors in time and disruption. In other words, it asks us to consider how we can get the greatest possible impact in the least amount of time with the least amount of cost and the least amount of disruption. What it produces is a very short list that essentially applies the Pareto principle to itself. If 80-20 is consistently true, there has to be about 5% of inputs that drive about 67% of outcomes. It radically changes how we think about prioritization because it tells us what we'll actually execute, not just what is worth the effort. And trust me, what actually gets done is the only thing that matters. I used this formula with a university that was trying to radically change its fundraising strategy. It was doing everything from monthly mailers to high-end dinners with famous speakers. After going through their entire laundry list of efforts, we landed on 2 that met the 5-6-7 criteria. So they stopped doing everything and doubled down on the 2. The result was dramatic. Fundraising soared, and consequently, the university had the funds it needed to expand. The university grew in a world where higher education is shrinking. I did the same approach with a major retailer, and we took a completely stalled initiative and stopped doing, quote, everything and focused on the 5% that we knew would implement. The result? The entire blockage disappeared within a matter of weeks, and the strategy implemented successfully. If you'd like to know more about 5-6-7 thinking, just reach out to me directly and I'll be happy to talk with you. See the link in the show notes on how to do that. But I'd like to finish with one more thought, and it's this. When fear is introduced, we slide to the bottom of the hill. Research consistently shows that when fear is introduced, it hijacks how we prioritize. Every one of us will shift to do what is most urgent because our brains are screaming at us, do this and do this now. Leaders, this is especially important for you because you must manage both your own fear and the fear of your teams when the jungle is making noises. When fear kicks in, especially the fear of failure, rejection, and risk, we all drop to focus only on what is most urgent. This is how our brains work. They hijack our problem-solving skills and replace them with survival skills. We literally leave the wonderful strategic thinking space that our brains were in and go straight into survival mode. And even good people do this. We may still try to do some low-level prioritization by adding importance to our sense of urgency, but we're still only going to be high enough on that hill to see a wall of green, leaves and vines and shouting orders that aren't actually going to help us navigate through the jungle. Our teams will run around in circles while our impact gets smaller and smaller. You see, it's the opposite of 5-6-7 thinking. It's called 95-33. 95% of our efforts produce at best only 33% of the impact we need to generate. And when our fellow leaders are shouting about completing 95-33 tasks and priorities in the midst of such chaos, sales numbers are missed. Productivity scores go down. Customer satisfaction and NPS drops. You can see why burnout and disengagement scores are telling us that employees hate their jobs, because prioritization is the Achilles heel of strategy.